Hola muchachos, ¿qué tal? Buenos días, aquí tienen el horario para hoy, viernes el 12 de mayo. No homework due for today, no homework for the weekend, no homework for the rest of the academic year. You guys are wrapping up the academic year. Today, the final lecture on the future, the grammar of the future tense. Warm-up question for today, ¿Qué vas a hacer este fin de semana? Asking you, what are you going to do this weekend? For today's warm-up, indicate 3 things that you plan to do this weekend in the simple future tense. We're going to go over, as we briefly began last class, the future tense on page 460. But before we do that, take a look at the simple future, which you can find on page 453, actually, which uses the verb ir, which is the verb to go, followed by the preposition a, which means to, so going to, and then the infinitive is whatever verb it is, whatever activity it is that you're going to do. For example, nosotros vamos a hablar por teléfono después de las clases. We are going to, so vamos is the nosotros form of the verb ir. We are going to talk on the phone after class. So using this construction, ir a infinitive, probably going to use the yo form, right, to say what you're going to do, or the nosotros form, to say what you and a family member or friends are going to do. Share 3 things that you guys are going to do in the future, simple future rather, to talk about your plans for the weekend. ¿Qué vas a hacer este fin de semana? Mi familia y yo vamos a viajar a Tennessee en coche. Second example there. ¿Qué vas a hacer este fin de semana? What are you going to do this weekend? Voy a trabajar con mi tío en su compañía. I am going to work with my uncle in his company. So 3 things that you plan to do this weekend using the simple future tense. After we do that, we'll go over the notes for the last lecture for the academic year, the grammar of the complex future, which really isn't all that complex at all, as we touched on briefly at the end of last class. We'll do a little guided practice with the regular conjugations in the future, and then take a quick glance at those irregular conjugations, and some guided practice there on page 462. So on page 460, you have the conjugations of verbs in the future. And as we talked about at the end of last class, we made some initial observations of the future. Now again, this is what we're going to cover, what you will cover in level 3 or level 4. In Spanish 3 and Spanish 4 is the future. So to form the future tense, as we looked at briefly last class, you could do it the way that we reviewed just a moment ago, which is using the simple future, ir a infinitive, to say what's going to happen in the future, or simply use the present tense. Right? O, as, a, amos, an. Present tense endings, but with a time marker referring to the future. Use the present tense grammar with a time marker making a reference to the future. And that's something that we do in English as well, right? Tomorrow we begin work. Present tense, but future reference. So these are 2 ways that we've kind of looked at briefly for how we could talk about future events. Now we're going to take a look at what's called the complex future. And it really isn't all that complex. To form the future tense, this is the beginning of your notes. Future tense expresses what will happen. To form the future tense of regular AR, ER, and IR verbs, you're going to use the same set of endings, y'all, for AR, ER, and IR verbs. And those endings are as, a, hemos, an. all of them carrying accents except for the nosotros form. And there you have the conjugations for a regular AR verb like trabajar, the verb to work, ser, an ER verb, the verb to be, and vivir, an IR verb, the verb to live. You can see how the infinitive stays, right? We don't drop the AR, ER, or IR in the infinitive. We just add to the infinitives these endings, and they're the same for AR, ER, and IR verbs. As, a, hemos, an. No catchy song I have for you guys this time. Not like the catchy song that we started off with the beginning of the academic year. O, as, a, hemos, an. Yeah, none of that. And just for perspective, again, this is where we started off, right? At the beginning of the academic year, way back in August, we mastered these 15 different conjugations in the present. So it's gotten progressively easier, right? Maybe the preterite be a little tough, but hopefully you felt this semester, especially this quarter, that the grammar that we've been looking at and looking at briefly is becoming progressively easier to deal with. Less to memorize, less steps in the conjugation process. And again, note that all forms have a written accent mark except the nosotros form. The whole goal for this chapter is for you guys to listen to and write about future plans, write about what people will do, what you will do after graduation. We concluded last class with a look at, 450, my bad, with the vocabulary for this chapter. So we looked at page 452, the vocabulario en contexto, right? And we highlighted what these key terms mean in English. I didn't give you Quizlet. I didn't give you the vocabulary in advance. All I did was give you the context that we're talking about your future goals and aspirations. And that based on the context and the collocations, the relationships, syntactic relationships and semantic relationships between words and context, you knew that this word meant careers, to graduate, college, graduation, university, profession, and una escuela técnica would be a technical school, right? Trade school. Because we're doing a great job of identifying cognates. We looked at the different professions there that are highlighted in beige and the descriptions of each of them. And we also did that for the key vocabulary on page 453. You guys look at the different professions. This is a great practice for the vocabulary portion of the final exam, the listening comprehension, is that you're going to have a description such as these, and then you're going to pick a vocabulary term that matches it. So being able to connect, an interest in medicine, liking animals, to be able to connect that to a particular profession is a useful skill to practice. So that's where we left off, utilizing the vocabulary. Now the grammar of the future, we're going to have conversations about your future goals and aspirations. But first, we need to kind of get a feel for what the future looks like as it applies to our lives and how it will apply to your life. So we are going to do exercise, is it 12? A ver. 14, forgive me. Exercise 14, and that's on page 461. Ejercicio 14 says, Las profesiones del futuro. Read the article. Get rid of all this. Read the article from the newspaper and write what the people are going to do in the professions, in these professions of the future. So we have ciencias ambientales, and you have footnotes here at the bottom to help make you make heads or tails. And you don't need to understand the whole reading, right? You just need to be able to understand how these key verbs conjugate according to the context. Ciencias ambientales are environmental sciences. Experto en turismo is an expert in tourism. Ingeniero de robots or robot engineers. And then finally, médico would be the field of medicine. All right, so let's do the first couple together. Again, you're taking the verbs that are in the infinitive, and we're just practicing how to conjugate them in the future, utilizing these new endings and new steps, just to become more comfortable with the tense itself. We'll do the first couple paragraphs together. I'll have you do the second two paragraphs with a partner. Ciencias ambientales. Las compañías del futuro entender que la planificación y la conservación de nuestro planeta ser esenciales. Companies of the future, and then entender, again, these are all verbs, right? Entender is the verb to understand. So companies of the future will understand. We want to conjugate this in the future. Our subject is plural, las compañías. So we know that the answer is going to be one of these two endings, right? Because these are singular endings, right, for one person, and these are plural for more than one. We're talking about the companies. That'd be the ellos, ellas form. So we're going to add on to entender. Remember, we don't remove the AR, ER, IR. We leave the ending as part of the infinitive and then just add the ending to the end. So entender would become entenderán, right? Las compañías del futuro entenderán, they will understand, que la planificación, the planning, y la conservación de nuestro planeta, the planning and conservation of our planet, and then ser is the verb to be, so will be essential. What will be essential? The planning and the conservation. That's a plural subject because we're talking about two things, right? So we're going to use the same ending as we did for number one, even though actually ser and entender are both ER verbs, so it doesn't matter, but same ending as number one, so ser would become serán. La planificación y la conservación de nuestro planeta serán esenciales. All right, let's take a look at the next paragraph. Experto en turismo. La gran demanda de turismo pronto resultar que no exista ninguna parte del planeta sin ser visitada. So the great demand in tourism soon will result that no part of our planet will exist without having been visited. Okay, so resultar, the verb to result or cause. What will result? The great demand. That's a singular subject, no S's there. So we're going to use the singular ending, third person singular ending in the future, which would be a. Right, that's the él, ella, usted form. In the future, resultará. La gran demanda de turismo pronto resultará que no exista ninguna parte del planeta sin ser visitada, without having been visited. Los expertos en turismo ayudar a los clientes a escoger las vacaciones apropiadas. Experts in tourism will help their clients choose appropriate vacations. Ayudar, in the future, conjugated according to our subject, los expertos is plural. We're talking about the experts in the third person plural. We're going to use that third person plural ending, ayudarán. Ayudarán a los clientes a escoger las vacaciones apropiadas. So that is exercise 14. To wrap up, we'll take a brief look at irregular verbs in the future on page 462. You knew there was a catch, right? Couldn't be that easy. We do have some irregular verbs as outlined on page 462. Irregular verbs in the future have the same endings as regular verbs, but their stems are irregular. That is worthwhile highlighting and including in your notes. Irregular verbs in the future, they have the same endings that we just looked at. What makes them irregular is their stem. Here are a few irregular verbs that have those irregular stems, and these are high frequency verbs, verbs we see a lot of in any tense. Hacer is the verb to do. ¿Qué clase de trabajo hará ella? What kind of job or what class of job will she do? Poder is the verb to be able to. En el futuro podremos usar el Internet para seguir más carreras. In the future, we will be able to use the Internet to pursue more careers. Saber is to know, or to know how to do something. ¿Sabrás hablar más de dos idiomas en el futuro? Will you know how to speak more than 2 languages in the future? Algún día tendré un trabajo, tener is the verb to have. Algún día tendré un trabajo con un salario muy bueno. Someday, I will have a job with a really good salary. Haber is the verb to exist, or to be, essentially. Habrá muchas oportunidades para usar el español en mi carrera. There will be, or there will exist, many opportunities to use Spanish in my career. So now, to finish off our last lecture for the academic year, we'll take a look at the Gramatica video, which you guys can find on the online textbook.
In the future, skyscrapers may touch the clouds. Wealth may be abundant. Or we may be overrun by the mole people. While we can't predict the future, we can tell you about irregular verbs in the future tense.
You already know your future endings, right? Has, hemos, es, and an. To form irregular verbs in the future, take your irregular stem and add on your endings, like tener. The stem changes to T-E-N-D-R, and add your ending.
So we'll watch that video together in class to get a little practice, and then we'll do some guided practice together to finish off. Una carta de una amiga is on page 462. Dos chicas son muy buenas amigas, pero ya no viven en la misma ciudad. 2 girls are really good friends, but now they don't live in the same city. Las dos se graduaron y están haciendo sus planes para ir a la universidad. Lee la carta y escribe la forma apropiada de los verbos en el futuro. So some of them are irregular, some of them are regular, and I'll point those out for you right now. We'll do the first 4 together. Querida Manola, ¿cómo estás? No puedo creer que por fin me gradué y que en agosto yo empezaré. Empezar is a regular verb. It's not one of the verbs that are highlighted up above. So if it's not one of the 5 verbs up above, you can assume it's a regular verb in the future. Okay? Empezar in the yo form. Empezaré. Y with an accent. Yo empezaré. I will start to study or begin to study at university. Estoy muy emocionada. I'm really excited. Todavía no sé. I'm still not sure. ¿Qué clases tomaré? Example of the future. I will take. Así que still in the yo form. Tener is irregular. Going to use that irregular stem and add the same ending as we did for number 1 in the yo form. Tendré. Así que yo tendré que hablar primero con un representante de la universidad. Él, saber is one of our irregular verbs from up top. Él sabrá. Él sabrá qué cursos debo tomar. ¿Y tú? ¿Has decidido a qué universidad asistirás? Asistirás in the to form for number 4. Number 5 is reflexive. The verb sentirse, we know that because of that irse ending. Remember that you can go to page 80 to get those reflexive pronouns, me, te, se, nos, and se, that are outlined there on page 80. We looked at those when we were talking about your daily routine in the second quarter. Now let me just take a quick look and see if there's anything else that may be tricky for you for that particular exercise. I think that's it, y'all. Yep. And just be mindful, 6, 7, 8, 9, actually all of those. Sentir is regular, it's just reflexive. But all the rest of those there, 6 through 9, are irregular. And just be mindful of those irregular stems. No homework at all due for the weekend. The only thing that I would recommend that you do is if you go to our Canvas course and you go under modules, remember that we're going to be practicing the speaking questions next week. So if you haven't done so already, take a look at those speaking questions. You can find them at the very bottom of our modules where it says Final Exam Review Resources. Study guide is right there. Speaking questions are right there as well. A video summary that walks you through what each of the questions are asking and how to respond. Video there, so check that out and then begin responding to each of these questions. All of these questions have been warm-up questions or questions that you've answered for a final exam or a project that you've done throughout the year. So take a look at your notes, take a look at your projects, your warm-ups, and I think you'll find that you have most of these done already. And then come with questions next week. We'll go through each of them together. What I'm looking for, what my expectations are in terms of how much you need to include in your response. You need to have relevant grammar and vocab. And then you can use the study guide itself to look up what pages, relevant vocab and grammar can be found. But come ready to class next week with those ready to go so that we can knock out the speed dating. But otherwise, you don't have any homework at all. Enjoy your weekend, everybody.